You're dead, old woman, you hear me? Dead! The crack of Donovan Patel's palm across Layla Larson's face echoed through the dusty Rose Saloon like thunder splitting the Texas sky. Blood sprayed from her lip. Her body hit the wooden floor with a sickening thud that made grown men flinch. She was 55 years old. She had survived cholera, bandits, and the brutal Texas sun. But this might finally break her. Donovan stood over her, breathing hard, his face twisted with rage. His black vest was buttoned tight over a chest that had never known honest work. 2 revolvers hung at his hips, polished and deadly. Behind him, 3 of his men blocked the exits, their hands resting on their weapons. They had done this before. Terrorized towns, hurt the weak, walked away, laughing. That's what happens when you don't move fast enough for Donovan Patel, he snarled, spitting near her face. Next time I tell you to get me whiskey, you run! Layla tried to push herself up, but her arms gave out. Her cheek was already swelling, turning purple. The entire saloon watched in frozen silence. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. That's what fear does to people. It turns them into statues. But what Donovan didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that outside, boots were hitting the dirt. Heavy, purposeful. Boots that belonged to a man who had made a promise 6 years ago to never kill again. A man they called the Ghost, because when he drew his guns, you were already dead before you heard the shot. Theo Larson had just heard his mother scream, and that promise, it was about to shatter like glass. If stories like this remind you why honor still matters in a world that's forgotten it, maybe you'll stay. Not because I asked, but because some truths deserve witnesses. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Let me know someone out there still believes the good guys should win. Layla Larson had been serving drinks at the Dusty Rose Saloon in Amarillo, Texas for 12 years. Every afternoon, same routine. She'd arrive at 3 o'clock, tie her apron, and greet the regulars with a smile that had survived more heartbreak than most men could imagine. Her husband died in a mine collapse when Theo was only 10. She raised that boy alone, working 3 jobs, bleeding herself dry so he could have a future. And Theo? He'd become something she never expected. A legend. A gunfighter so fast, so accurate, that outlaws would cross state lines just to avoid him. They said he could shoot a coin out of the air at 50 paces. They said he once disarmed 4 men in under 3 seconds. They said he'd never missed a shot that mattered. But 6 years ago, after a shootout in El Paso left 11 men dead, Theo hung up his guns, told his mother he was done. Built a small ranch 30 miles outside Amarillo, raised cattle, tried to forget the ghosts that haunted his sleep. He visited Layla every Sunday, brought her flowers, fixed things around her house, tried to be the son she deserved, not the killer he'd become. Today was Thursday. Theo had ridden into town early to surprise her, maybe take her to dinner. He'd tied his horse outside the saloon and was reaching for the door when he heard the commotion inside. Heard Donovan's voice. Heard the slap. Heard his mother hit the floor. Every muscle in his body went rigid. His hands, those hands that had ended so many lives, curled into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. The door stood between him and the man who had just hurt the only person in the world he loved. He pushed it open, and everything changed. The saloon doors swung wide with a slow, deliberate creak that cut through the tension like a blade. Every head turned, every breath held. Theo Larson stepped inside, and the temperature dropped. He was tall, 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to block out the sunlight streaming through the door behind him. He wore all black, hat, coat, vest, even his boots. But it was his eyes that made men's blood run cold. Dark, empty, like staring into a well with no bottom. On his hips hung two ivory-handled Colt 45s that looked almost beautiful. Almost. Until you remembered what they were built for. Theo's gaze swept the room with mechanical precision, cataloguing threats, exits, positions. Then his eyes found his mother on the floor, blood dripping from her mouth, her face already swollen and bruised. Two women knelt beside her, trying to help her up. Layla's eyes went wide when she saw her son. She shook her head frantically, mouthing the word no. But Theo wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at Donovan Patel, who sat slouched in a chair near the bar, boots propped up on a table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand. Donovan glanced at the stranger with mild irritation, like someone had interrupted his afternoon nap. "Saloon's closed," Donovan said lazily. "Come back tomorrow." Theo didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood there, hands loose at his sides, his coat pulled back just enough to show those ivory handles gleaming in the lamplight. "Ma," Theo said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who did this to you?" Layla tried to speak, but her voice broke. One of the women helping her pointed a trembling finger at Donovan. Theo's jaw clenched, and Donovan Patel finally understood he'd made a terrible, irreversible mistake. Donovan's boots hit the floor with a thud as he stood up, suddenly interested in this stranger who dared walk into his territory. He was a big man, mean, scarred, with a reputation written in blood across 3 counties. He'd killed 17 men in gunfights, robbed twice that many. And never, not once, had he felt afraid. Until now. Something about this man in black made Donovan's instincts scream danger. "That old woman your mother?" Donovan asked, his hand drifting toward his gun. Behind him, his 3 men spread out, flanking him, hands hovering near their weapons, 4 against 1. They liked those odds. "She is," Theo said. His voice was calm, too calm, like a man discussing the weather. "And you just made the last mistake of your life." Donovan laughed, but it sounded forced. "Big talk from a man who's outnumbered. You know who I am, stranger? I'm Donovan Patel. I've killed more men than you've probably met. I've robbed banks, burned ranches, and sheriffs run when they hear my name. So unless you want to end up in a pine box, I suggest you turn around and forget you ever walked in here." Theo tilted his head slightly, like he was studying an insect. "I'm going to give you one chance. One. Get on your knees. Apologize to my mother. Leave this town. Do that, and you get to see tomorrow." The saloon erupted in nervous laughter from Donovan's men. Get on his knees. Nobody talked to Donovan Patel like that. Not lawmen, not other outlaws. Certainly not some stranger in fancy black clothes. But Donovan wasn't laughing anymore. He was staring into Theo's eyes, and what he saw there made his mouth go dry. He saw death, patient, inevitable, waiting. "Who are you?" Donovan whispered, his voice suddenly shaky. "They used to call me the Ghost." The name hit Donovan like a physical punch. The Ghost. Every outlaw west of the Mississippi knew that name, knew the stories. 20 confirmed kills in face-to-face duels, another 30 brought in dead because they'd tried to run. Accuracy that bordered on supernatural. They said the Ghost could draw and fire both guns before most men could clear leather. They said he'd cleaned up 3 towns single-handedly. They said he'd walked away from a shootout with the Malone gang that left 11 men dead. And the Ghost didn't have a scratch on him. Donovan had always thought the stories were exaggerated. Campfire tales to scare rookie outlaws. But looking at Theo Larson now, seeing the absolute certainty in those dark eyes, Donovan knew every story had been true, maybe understated. "You retired," Donovan said, his voice cracking slightly. "Everyone said you hung up your guns. 6 years ago." I did, Theo said. Built a ranch, raised cattle, tried to be a better man than the one who left bodies in his wake. And I was doing fine until you put your hands on my mother. Donovan's men were getting nervous now. They recognized the name too. One of them, a kid barely 20 with a scraggly beard, took a step backward toward the door. Theo's eyes flicked to him for a fraction of a second. "Don't," Theo said softly. The kid froze. Layla struggled to her feet with the women's help. "Theo, please. Just take me home, please. I don't want this. I don't want you to go back to being that man." "Ma," Theo said, still not taking his eyes off Donovan. "Some men don't understand mercy. They only understand consequences." And maybe that's why stories like this matter. Because we've all seen good people hurt by bad ones. If you're still here, if you're still watching, maybe leave your mark. Comment where you're from. Hit subscribe. Not for me, but because you believe monsters should face justice. "Draw," Theo said. Not a request, a command. Donovan's hand trembled above his gun. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool saloon air. Every instinct screamed at him to back down, to apologize, to run. But his pride, that poisonous pride that had carried him through years of being the meanest, fastest, most feared man in any room, wouldn't let him. "You think you're faster than 4 guns?" Donovan asked, trying to sound confident, failing. "Even the ghost can't beat those odds." "Try me." The words hung in the air like smoke. The piano player had fled. The bartender had ducked behind the bar. The few remaining patrons pressed themselves against the walls, trying to become invisible. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone knew someone was about to die. Donovan looked at his men. They looked back, their faces pale. They'd signed up to rob stagecoaches and terrorize farmers, not face down a legend. But they couldn't back down now. Not in front of witnesses. Not without destroying their reputations. "On 3, Donovan said, his voice steadier now. He'd made his choice. Better to die trying than live as a coward. 1. Theo's hands hung loose at his sides. He looked almost bored. 2. Layla screamed, "Theo, no!" 3. 4 hands dropped to 4 guns. Leather creaked, metal scraped. Time seemed to slow, stretching each millisecond into an eternity. Donovan's fingers wrapped around his Colt, pulling it free, his arm coming up, his thumb cocking the hammer. But Theo's hands had already moved. Not in a blur. There was no desperate scramble, no panic. Just smooth, mechanical precision, like watching a machine built for one purpose. His right hand drew and fired before Donovan's gun cleared his holster. The bullet shattered Donovan's right shoulder. His gun clattered to the floor. Donovan screamed, a raw animal sound of pain and shock. He spun halfway around from the impact, clutching his destroyed shoulder, blood pouring between his fingers. His knees buckled, but he stayed upright through sheer stubborn will. Theo's left hand had already drawn his second Colt. The largest of Donovan's men, a brute named Carson with arms like tree trunks, finally cleared leather and raised his weapon. Theo fired. The bullet hit Carson's gun hand, sending the revolver flying and taking a finger with it. Carson howled and collapsed, cradling his mangled hand. The other 2 men froze, their guns half drawn, suddenly understanding that continuing this fight meant death. Not might mean death. Absolutely, certainly meant death. "Drop them," Theo said. Not loud, not angry, just certain. The guns hit the floor with dull thuds. 2 pairs of hands went up, trembling. The entire exchange had taken less than 4 seconds. 4 men had drawn weapons. 2 were shot. 2 had surrendered. And Theo Larson stood there with both Colts still drawn, not even breathing hard. Smoke curled from the barrels of his guns like lazy morning fog. Donovan fell to his knees, his face white as milk, his eyes wide with shock and terror. Blood soaked his vest, dripping onto the wooden floor in steady drops. He looked up at Theo, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as a threat, as death itself given human form. "Please," Donovan gasped. "Please, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know she was your mother. I didn't know you were—" "You didn't know," Theo interrupted, his voice cold as winter steel. "That she was a human being who deserved respect? That's your defense? That you only hurt her because you didn't think consequences existed?" What Donovan said next would determine if he ever left that saloon alive. "I'm sorry," Donovan choked out, tears mixing with sweat on his face. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry. Please, please don't kill me." Theo looked at his mother. Layla stood there, supported by the two women, her face swollen and bloody. But her eyes, those eyes that had seen so much hardship, so much loss, held something Theo recognized. Compassion, even now, even for the man who had hurt her. She shook her head slightly, not in disappointment, in plea. "Don't," that gesture said. "Don't become that man again. Don't let him pull you back into the darkness." Theo's jaw worked. Every fiber of his being wanted to put a bullet between Donovan's eyes, wanted to make him pay for every second of pain he'd caused. But 6 years of building a life, of choosing peace over violence, of trying to honor his father's memory, all of that warred with his rage. "Stand up," Theo finally said, holstering his right-hand Colt, but keeping his left one pointed at Donovan's head. Donovan struggled to his feet, swaying, still clutching his ruined shoulder. "You're going to leave this town," Theo said. "You and your men. You're going to ride straight to Marshal Hendricks in Wichita Falls. You're going to confess every crime you've committed, every robbery, every beating, every murder. All of it." "That's a death sentence," Donovan whispered. "They'll hang me." "Yes," Theo said. "They will. But that's better than what I'll do if you don't. Because if I ever hear your name again, if I ever hear you hurt someone's mother, someone's family, I will find you. I don't care if you're in prison. I don't care if you're in hell itself. I will find you, and what I did today will seem like mercy." Donovan nodded frantically, blood still flowing from his shoulder. His men helped Carson to his feet, the big man cradling his mangled hand, whimpering. They stumbled toward the door, supporting each other, leaving a trail of blood across the wooden floor. At the doorway, Donovan paused. He looked back at Layla, his face twisted with pain and genuine regret. "Ma'am," he said, his voice breaking, "I truly am sorry. There's no excuse for what I did. I hope someday you can forgive me." Layla said nothing. She just watched him leave with those tired, knowing eyes. When the door closed behind them, she finally allowed herself to collapse. Theo was there instantly, catching her, supporting her weight. "Ma, are you okay? Let me get Doc Morrison." "I'm fine," Layla said, but her voice was shaky. "You came just in time, like you always do." Theo helped her to a chair, then knelt beside her, examining the swelling on her face with gentle hands. The bartender brought water and clean cloth. Theo cleaned the blood from his mother's face, his movements surprisingly tender for a man who had just shot 2 people. "You shouldn't have come back to this, Theo," Layla said softly. "You were done with this life. You were happy." "I am happy," Theo said. "But not if it means letting someone hurt you." Outside, the sound of horses leaving town echoed through the street. Donovan Patel and his men were gone. But Theo's instincts, honed by years of surviving impossible odds, were screaming that something was wrong. Men like Donovan didn't change. They would run now, scared and wounded. But fear fades, pain heals, and when it did, they would remember the humiliation. They would remember the ghost, and wounded pride made men do stupid, dangerous things. Theo stood and walked to the window, watching the dust cloud of the departing riders. His hands rested on his gun belts, relaxed but ready, always ready. That was the curse of being what he was. You never truly rested. "Ma," he said without turning from the window, "pack a bag. You're coming to the ranch with me." "Theo, I have a life here." "Your life won't matter if you're dead." His voice was harder now. "Donovan's going to come back. Maybe not today, maybe not this month, but he's going to come back with more men, and he's going to want revenge. Not just on me, on you, for being the reason he got humiliated." Layla started to protest, but the bartender spoke up. "He's right, Layla. I know men like Donovan. They fester, and when they come back, it won't be for a fair fight. It'll be an ambush." Theo turned from the window. "We leave in an hour." His tone left no room for argument. As Layla left to gather her things, Theo stood alone in the saloon. He pulled out one of his Colts and checked the cylinder. Fully loaded, always fully loaded, because in his world, the moment you got careless was the moment you died. He had tried to leave this life behind, tried to build something clean and good, but violence had a way of finding men like him. And now, because he had done the right thing by saving his mother, he had painted a target on both their backs. The ghost was back, and somewhere out there, Donovan Patel was making plans. If this story meant something to you, if you believe the world still needs people willing to stand between the weak and the wicked, then maybe you'll share it. Subscribe if you think courage still matters. Comment where you're watching from.